There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from discovering you never really knew the person you loved most. For 62-year-old Clyra Boone, that moment arrived 3 years after burying her husband, when a loose floorboard in his workshop revealed something impossible. A sealed stone tunnel leading deep beneath their Montana home. She thought grief was the hardest part of losing him. She was wrong. What she found in that hidden passage changed everything. Journals filled with unfamiliar handwriting, maps marking places they'd never discussed. Evidence of a life running parallel to the one they'd shared for 40 years. Who was the man she married? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light came late to Dead Fern Ridge, filtered through centuries-old pines that stood like sentinels around Clyra Boone's homestead. She'd lived in the shadow of these mountains for 43 years, the last 3 of them alone. The cabin sat at 7,200 feet, accessible only by a winding dirt road that became impassable each winter. Most people would call it isolation. Clyra called it home. She stood at her kitchen window, hands wrapped around a chipped mug that Owen had made in a pottery class decades ago. The coffee had gone cold while she stared at the workshop, a sturdy log structure 50 yards from the main house. Owen had built it the year after they married, claiming he needed space for his woodworking projects. For 40 years, she'd respected that boundary. The workshop was his domain, filled with saws and chisels and half-finished furniture that smelled of cedar and pine pitch. 3 years since his death, and she'd barely touched the place. Clyra was 62, lean and weather-hardened from a lifetime outdoors. Her hands bore the scars of her 30-year career as a forest ranger rope. Burns, blade cuts, the crooked middle finger that had healed wrong after a fall on the north face of Garnet Peak. Her hair, more silver than brown now, hung in a single braid down her back. She wore the same practical clothes she'd always favored: flannel shirt, worn jeans, boots resoled 3 times because good leather was worth keeping. The ranger station had given her a gold watch when she retired 5 years ago. Owen had been sick by then, though neither of them knew it yet. He'd stood beside her at the ceremony, proud and quiet, his hand warm in hers. 2 years later, the cancer diagnosis came. Pancreatic, swift and merciless. He was gone within 6 months. She'd thought she knew everything about grief, the way it hollowed you out, made every familiar thing feel strange, how you'd reach for someone in the night and find only empty sheets. The particular cruelty of forgetting, just for a moment, that they were gone, then remembering all over again. But there were other things she was only beginning to understand. The questions that surfaced in the quiet, the gaps in stories she'd never noticed before. The locked drawer in his workshop desk that she'd never asked about because marriage, she'd believed, required trust. Her daughter Kirsten called every few weeks from Seattle. The conversations were dutiful, affectionate in a distant way. Kirsten was 41, a corporate lawyer with a corner office and no time for the mountains that had raised her. She'd left for college at 18 and never really come back. "How are you doing, Mum?" Kirsten would ask. And Clyra would say, "Fine," because what else was there to say? That she spent whole days without speaking to another soul? That she was starting to forget the sound of Owen's voice? Her son, Travis, was even more remote. He worked on a ranch near Cody, Wyoming, breaking horses and mending fences. He called twice a year, on her birthday and Christmas. The silences between them had grown so long that Clyra longer knew how to bridge them. Travis had been 20 when Owen's drinking got bad that year, between the Ranger Academy rejection and his decision to leave Montana entirely. He'd never quite forgiven his father for the things said during those dark months. And now, Owen was gone, and forgiveness was a conversation they'd never have. The coffee had gone completely cold. Clyra poured it down the sink and rinsed the mug. She'd been putting off the workshop for 3 years, finding excuses: too cold, too busy, too soon. But spring was here, and the excuses were wearing thin. The building needed maintenance, the roof probably leaked, and if she was honest, she needed to face what was left of him. She pulled on her canvas jacket and walked across the clearing. The morning air was sharp with pine resin and the last traces of snow melting in the high country. A raven called from somewhere in the timber. The workshop door stuck it always had, and she put her shoulder into it the way Owen had taught her. The smell hit her first, sawdust and machine oil, with an undertone of wood smoke from the small stove in the corner. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. His work gloves lay on the bench, fingers curled as if he'd just set them down. A half-finished rocking chair stood by the window, waiting for sandpaper that would never come. Clyra moved through the space slowly, running her fingers along the workbench. Owen had been a craftsman, patient and precise. The furniture he'd made filled their home kitchen table, bedroom dresser, the chair by the fireplace where she still sat every evening. Each piece was solid, built to last generations. Like their marriage, she'd thought, built on trust and time and the simple dailiness of shared life. But there had been gaps. Times when he'd disappear for days, claiming he was helping a friend build a cabin or checking on a remote property. She'd never questioned it. He always came back tired but satisfied, smelling of wood smoke and mountain air. The work he did mattered to him, and that was enough for her. Now, standing in his workshop, she wondered what she'd missed. The floorboards creaked under her weight as she moved toward the desk. It was a massive thing, built from reclaimed barnwood, with drawers that slid on runners he'd made himself. The locked drawer was on the bottom right. She'd noticed it years ago, had even asked about it once. Owen had smiled and said he kept important papers there. Insurance documents, the deed to the land. Nothing interesting. She'd believed him because marriage meant believing. The key, she knew, was somewhere in the workshop. Owen had been methodical about such things. She searched the obvious places first: the coffee can, where he kept spare hardware, the shelf above the workbench, the toolbox. Nothing. Then she remembered his habit of hiding things in plain sight. She checked the rocking chair, running her hand along the underside of the seat. Her fingers found a small leather pouch taped to the wood. Inside was a single key. It fit the drawer perfectly. The lock turned with a soft click that seemed too loud in the quiet workshop. Clyra pulled the drawer open and found exactly what Owen had said: insurance papers, the land deed, tax documents. She almost laughed at herself for the suspicion that had been building in her chest. Then she noticed the drawer wasn't as deep as it should be. She pulled the papers out completely, stacking them on the desk. The drawer's interior was perhaps 8 inches deep, but from the outside it should have been at least 12. She rapped her knuckles against the bottom, hollow. It took her 10 minutes to find the release mechanism, a small wooden peg that had to be pushed just right. The false bottom lifted away, revealing a space beneath. Inside was a single envelope, yellowed with age, sealed but not addressed. Her name was written on the front in Owen's careful handwriting, for Clyra, if needed. She held it for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. Whatever was inside, Owen had hidden it deliberately, had wanted her to find it only under certain circumstances, if needed. But needed for what? Before she could open it, something else caught her eye. The corner of the false bottom hadn't settled back into place quite right. There was a gap, and through it she could see something that didn't make sense. Stone. Not the wooden floor of the workshop, but cut stone, fitted and mortared. Clyra set the envelope aside and removed the false bottom completely. Beneath it, where the workshop floor should have been, was a section of carefully laid stone, about 3 feet square, and set into the stone was an iron ring, the metal dark with age. Her heart began to beat faster. This wasn't something Owen had mentioned. Not in 40 years of marriage, not in all the time they'd spent in this workshop together. This was something he'd kept hidden, something he'd built into the very foundation of the place. She knelt beside the opening and pulled the ring. The stone section lifted with surprising ease, rising on hidden hinges that had been kept oiled and functional. Beneath was darkness and the smell of cold earth and something else. Old wood, stale air, stone steps descended into shadow. Clyra sat back on her heels, staring into the opening. A tunnel. Her husband had built a tunnel beneath his workshop, concealed it for decades, and never said a word. The questions she'd been carrying for 3 years suddenly felt like the smallest part of a much larger mystery. Who was Owen Boone? What had he been doing in the darkness beneath their home? And why had he kept it secret from the woman who'd shared his bed, raised his children, trusted him with every aspect of her life? The envelope still lay on the desk, unopened. The tunnel waited below, patient as the mountain itself. Clyra looked between them, understanding that whatever she chose to do next would change everything. She could seal this back up, pretend she'd never found it, go back to her quiet grief and her simple questions. Or she could descend into the darkness and find out who her husband really was. The raven called again, closer now. Through the workshop window she could see the familiar ridgeline, the peaks she'd patrolled for 30 years. She'd spent her life in these mountains, thought she knew every secret they held. She'd been wrong. Clyra stood, brushed the dust from her jeans, and went to the main house. She'd need supplies, a good lantern, rope, her old ranger backpack. Whatever was down there had been waiting for 3 years. It could wait another hour while she prepared properly. But as she gathered her gear, her hands were shaking. Not from fear, exactly. From the terrible understanding that the life she thought she'd lived might have been something else entirely. That the man she'd loved and buried might have been a stranger. And that the truth, whatever it was, had been beneath her. Feet all along. Clyra returned to the workshop an hour later with her old ranger pack, a lead lantern, 50 feet of climbing rope, and a water bottle. She'd changed into her hiking boots, the good ones with ankle support, and pulled her hair back tight. Her hands had stopped shaking. Whatever was down there, she'd face it the way she'd faced everything else in her life, directly and with her eyes open. She stood at the edge of the opening, looking down. The stone steps were narrow, carved directly into bedrock or laid with the same precision as the hatch itself. They descended into darkness at a steep angle. She couldn't see the bottom. The lantern's beam cut through the shadows, revealing walls of fitted stone. This wasn't a root cellar or a simple excavation. Someone had built this with care and skill, reinforcing the passage against collapse. The work would have taken months, maybe years, all of it done in secret. Clyra tested the first step with her weight. Solid. She descended, slowly. One hand on the wall for balance, the lantern held high. The temperature dropped with each step. The air smelled of minerals and cold earth, but also of wood oil, the same kind Owen used in his workshop. Someone had maintained this space. Recently, the steps continued for perhaps 15 feet before opening into a chamber. Clyra stepped down onto a floor of packed earth and raised her lantern. The room was roughly 10 feet square, with walls of the same fitted stone. Wooden shelves lined 2 walls, and what she saw there made her breath catch. Journals, dozens of them, leather-bound and organized by date. Maps in waterproof tubes, metal boxes stacked and labeled with codes she didn't recognize. A small folding table and chair sat in one corner. On the table was a kerosene lamp, a box of matches, and a leather-bound book left open, as if someone had been interrupted while reading. This wasn't an abandoned space. This was an archive, a library, a record of something kept, deliberately and carefully preserved. Clyra moved to the shelves, her lantern casting long shadows. The journals were labeled by year, starting with 1981, 2 years after she and Owen married. She pulled the first one down, her hands surprisingly steady now. The training that had carried her through emergencies and disasters was taking over. Assess the situation, gather information, react based on facts, not fear. She opened the journal. Owen's handwriting filled the pages, the same careful script she knew from birthday cards and grocery lists. But the content was nothing she recognized. The 15th of March 1981. Met with Sandoval at the North Crossing. Package delivered as arranged. Payment confirmed. T.R. says the route is secure for monthly runs. She turned pages, scanning entries. The pattern became clear quickly. Coordinates, references to deliveries and pickups. Names she'd never heard Owen mention. Routes through mountain passes she recognized from her ranger. Work remote. Rarely. Patrolled. Perfect for moving things without being seen. Her husband had been smuggling something across the Canadian border. Clyra sat down in the folding chair, the journal open in her lap. She tried to reconcile what she was reading with the man she'd known. Owen had been gentle, principled, devoted to their family. He'd coached Travis's Little League team. He'd built Kirsten a dollhouse that was a perfect replica of their cabin. He'd held Clyra's hand through 2 miscarriages and never once made her feel like she'd failed. How did that man become someone who ran illegal routes through the wilderness? She forced herself to keep reading. The entries continued through 1981 and into 1982. The language was careful, coded in places, but the meaning was clear enough. Owen was part of an organization, taking orders from someone identified only as T.R. The packages were never described, but the payments were substantial, thousands of dollars per run. Then she found an entry that made everything more complicated. The 3rd of June 1982, told T.R., "I'm done after this season. Clyra's pregnant again. Can't risk it anymore." He didn't take it well. Said, "I know too much to walk away clean. We'll see." Pregnant again. That would have been with Kirsten. She was born in January of 1983. Clyra remembered that pregnancy, how careful Owen had been, how protective. She'd thought it was just the memory of the miscarriages. Now, she wondered if it was something else. Fear, perhaps, or guilt. The entries through the rest of 1982 showed tension, references to arguments with T.R., to pressure to continue, to veiled threats. Then, in November, made my decision, told them I'm out. T.R. didn't take it well, keeping records just in case. If anything happens, Clyra needs to know where these are. But she hadn't known. For 40 years she hadn't known. Clyra stood and moved to the maps. She unrolled one of the tubes, spreading the map on the table. It showed the border region between Montana and Alberta, with routes marked in red ink. Notes in the margins indicated patrol patterns, safe houses, times when crossing was least risky. It was the work of someone who understood wilderness, navigation, and border security, someone with training. She remembered then that Owen had served in the army before they met. He'd been vague about it, said he'd been stationed in Germany, done his time and gotten out. She'd never pressed for details. Now, she wished she had. A sound from above made her freeze. Footsteps in the workshop. Someone was up there, moving around. Her first thought was relief. Maybe it was a neighbor, someone who'd seen her truck and stopped by. But they lived too far from anyone for casual visits, and nobody else had a key to the workshop. The footsteps moved across the floor directly above her, deliberate, searching. Whoever it was knew exactly where they were going. Clyra extinguished her lantern and stood in the sudden darkness. Her heart hammered. She'd left the hatch open, the false bottom removed. Whoever was up there would see it immediately. The footsteps stopped. Then came the sound of the hatch being lowered, not closed completely, but eased back into place. A warning? A trap? She couldn't tell. Then silence, long and complete. Clyra waited, counting her breaths the way she'd learned during survival training. After 5 minutes, she risked turning the lantern back on, keeping it low. The chamber looked the same. Nothing had changed. But someone knew she was down here. Someone had been watching the workshop, had known or guessed that she'd find the tunnel. She looked around the chamber with new urgency. There had to be more, an explanation, a reason, something that would make sense of all this. Her eyes fell on the tunnel wall opposite the stairs. Unlike the other walls, This one wasn't finished. The passage continued into darkness, deeper into the mountain. Owen hadn't just built a hiding place, he'd built a passage to somewhere else. Clyra gathered the first journal, one of the maps, and moved back to the stairs. She needed to get out, to think, to figure out what to do with this information. But as she climbed, another thought struck her with the force of a physical blow. If Owen had kept this secret for 40 years, if someone else knew about it and was watching, then maybe his death hadn't been what she thought. Maybe the cancer that took him so quickly wasn't just cruel luck. Maybe someone had made sure Owen Boone took his secrets to the grave. And maybe, by finding this tunnel, she just painted a target on her own back. Clyra emerged from the tunnel with her heart still racing and carefully lowered the stone hatch back into place. She replaced the false bottom of the desk drawer, returned the key to its hiding spot under the rocking chair, and locked the workshop behind her. Every movement was deliberate, controlled. She'd learned long ago that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford. Back in the cabin, she spread the journal and map on her kitchen table. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, making the pages glow. She made fresh coffee and forced herself to sit, to read methodically, to treat this like any investigation. The journal covered 1981 through 1987, 6 years of Owen's secret life laid out in his careful handwriting. She read every entry, taking notes on a separate pad. Patterns emerged. The operations ran primarily during summer and fall, when the mountain passes were clear. The packages went north into Canada, though what they contained was never specified. Money came back south, cash payments that Owen recorded meticulously. The amounts stunned her. In 1983 alone, Owen had moved over $40,000 through these runs. That was more than twice what he'd made from his legitimate carpentry work. She remembered that year clearly. They'd paid off the cabin, bought a new truck. Owen had insisted they start college funds for both kids. She'd thought they were, just being careful with money, living frugally and saving well. Now she understood. Their financial stability had been built on whatever Owen was smuggling across the border. But the journal revealed something else too. Owen hadn't been comfortable with the work. Entries from 1984 onward showed increasing doubt. The 12th of April, 1984. Travis asked me today what I do when I'm gone. Couldn't look him in the eye when I answered. How do you tell your son his father is a criminal? The 3rd of September, 1985. Clyra deserves better than this, better than me, but I'm in too deep now. TR made that clear. The 19th of January, 1987, final decision made. I'm done after this season. Whatever it takes, whatever the cost, I can't do this anymore. The entries through 1987 showed a man trying to extract himself from something dangerous. References to arguments with TR became more frequent and more heated. Then came the final entry, dated the 15th of November 1987. Told TR, face to face today, I'm out, keeping all records as insurance. He knows if anything happens to me or my family, everything goes to the authorities. It's the only leverage I have. He didn't like it, but he accepted it, I think. God, I hope I've made the right choice. The entry ended there. No more journal entries for 1987. Clyra flipped through the remaining pages all blank. She checked the shelf notation she'd seen in the tunnel. There should be more journals, covering the years after 1987, but she'd only brought this one. She turned her attention to the map. The routes marked in red ink were sophisticated, showing an understanding of terrain and patrol patterns that went beyond simple local knowledge. Whoever had planned these routes, TR, presumably had access to intelligence about border security operations. One location was marked with a star and circled, a point roughly 30 miles northeast of her homestead, deep in the Scapegoat Wilderness. The notation beside it read, Primary cache, emergency access only. A cache, Owen had mentioned keeping records as insurance, and this map suggested a physical location where something was stored. But 30 miles into the wilderness was a serious undertaking, especially alone. That was 2 days of hard hiking at minimum, through country where a twisted ankle could be fatal. She was studying the route when she heard a vehicle approaching. The sound of tires on gravel was distinctive in the silence of the mountains. Clyra moved to the window and watched a dark SUV come up the drive. Not a vehicle she recognized, not a neighbor. The SUV stopped near the workshop. A man got out, late 50s, grey hair, fit build, wearing hiking clothes that looked expensive but practical. He surveyed the property with the careful attention of someone trained to assess situations. His eyes lingered on the workshop, then moved to the cabin. Clyra's hand moved instinctively to the drawer where she kept Owen's old revolver. She'd learned to shoot decades ago, maintained her skills. With annual practice, the weapon was cleaned and loaded, but she left it in the drawer for now. Sometimes the appearance of vulnerability was more useful than the appearance of threat. She opened the cabin door before he could knock. "Help you with something?" Her voice was steady, neutral. The man smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Mrs. Boone, I'm sorry to intrude. My name is Simon Drexler. I was a friend of your husband's. I was passing through the area and thought I'd pay my respects." The name meant nothing to her. Owen had never mentioned anyone named Simon Drexler. And passing through Dead Fern Ridge wasn't something that happened by accident. "You came here deliberately or not at all?" "I don't recall Owen mentioning you," Clyra said. "We knew each other years ago. Lost touch, the way people do. I was sorry to hear about his passing. Cancer, wasn't it?" There was something in the way he said it. Not quite a question, more like confirmation of something he already knew. 3 years ago, Clyra said. "Pancreatic." Simon nodded slowly. "Terrible thing. Quick, though. That's something." "Was there something specific you needed, Mr. Drexler?" He glanced toward the workshop again. "Owen and I worked together back in the 80s. I was in the area and wanted to see the place. He talked about it sometimes. The workshop he built. The land. He was proud of what you'd made together. The 80s, the same period covered by the journal sitting on her kitchen table, not 30 feet from where they stood. "I'm afraid I'm busy right now," Clyra said. "But thank you for stopping by." Simon studied her face for a long moment. She met his gaze without flinching. Whatever he was looking for, he apparently didn't find it. "Of course, I didn't mean to intrude." He handed her a card. "If you ever need anything, or if you find any of Owen's old papers and have questions, please give me a call." She took the card. Plain, white, just a name and phone number. No company, no title. She tucked it into her pocket without looking at it again. Simon walked back to his SUV, but paused before getting in. "Mrs. Boone, Owen was a good man. Whatever you might hear or find out, remember that. He did what he thought was right." Then he was gone, dust rising behind his vehicle as it headed back down the mountain. Clyra stood on the porch for a long time after the sound of his engine faded. The timing was too perfect. The day she finds the tunnel, someone from Owen's past appears at her door. Either Simon Drexler had been watching the property, or he'd been alerted somehow that she'd made the discovery, which meant she wasn't alone in this investigation. Someone else was interested in what Owen had hidden, and she had no way of knowing if they were friend or enemy. Clyra spent that night reading the journal by firelight, the cabin doors locked, and Owen's revolver on the table beside her. She'd wedged a chair under the workshop door handle as an additional precaution. If anyone tried to access the tunnel, she'd hear it. The journal entries painted a picture that was both clearer and more troubling than she'd initially thought. Owen hadn't been smuggling drugs or weapons. The references to packages and documents suggested something different, information perhaps, or communications equipment. Several entries mentioned political refugees and asylum seekers. One entry from June 1983 was particularly revealing. Helped 3 families cross last night. 2 from El Salvador, 1 from Guatemala. TR says they're targeted by death squads back home. Seeing those kids, scared but hopeful, makes this feel less like crime and more like duty. Still doesn't make lying to Clyra any easier. So Owen had been part of an underground railroad of sorts, helping people escape persecution. It didn't make the deception hurt less, but it complicated her anger. He'd believed he was doing something right, even if it meant breaking the law and lying to his wife. But that didn't explain why he'd kept the tunnel and the records for so long. If he'd stopped in 1987, why maintain the cache? Why keep journals that could incriminate him? The answer was in one of the later entries, dated October 1987. TR made it clear today that leaving isn't really an option. I know too much about the operation routes, contacts, funding sources. He said I'm welcome to stop active work, but the records need to stay secure. Insurance for everyone, he called it. I'll keep them hidden. It's the only way to keep my family safe. Insurance. The word appeared again and again in the final entries. Owen had kept evidence as leverage, a guarantee that exposing him would expose everyone else involved. It was cold calculation, wrapped in protective intent. Clyra found a photograph tucked between pages near the end of the journal. Black and white, edges worn. 4 men standing beside a truck in wilderness, all armed with hunting rifles. Owen was on the left, younger but recognizable. The others were strangers. One man's face was circled in red ink, heavily built, dark hair, intense eyes. A handwritten note at the bottom read, TR and crew, July 1982. She studied the circled face. Theodore Ryland, presumably. The man who'd organized the operation, who'd recruited Owen, who'd made it clear that leaving wasn't really an option. He'd be in his 60s or 70s now, if he was still alive. And based on Simon Drexler's visit, someone was definitely still interested in Owen's records. The question was, why? After 37 years, what value did these old journals and maps have? Unless the operation had continued, had evolved into something larger, unless the people involved had moved on to positions where past crimes could become present liabilities. Clyra rose and made more coffee as dawn light began filtering through the windows. She hadn't slept. Her mind was turning over possibilities, trying to construct a narrative that made sense. Owen had been part of something he believed was just. He'd tried to leave but been forced to maintain silence and keep evidence. He'd protected that evidence for decades, right up until his death. And then what? Had someone ensured that death came sooner rather than later? The thought that had struck her in the tunnel returned with greater force. Owen's cancer had been aggressive, diagnosed late. He'd gone from healthy to dying in less than a year. The doctors had said it was typical for pancreatic cancer, usually asymptomatic until the late stages. But what if it wasn't natural? What if someone had made sure Owen wouldn't live long enough to become a problem? She had no evidence for such a suspicion. But she had instincts honed by 30 years of wilderness work, of reading situations and trusting her gut when something felt wrong. And this felt wrong. Clyra called Kirsten's number. It was 6 in the morning in Seattle, but her daughter answered on the 3rd ring, voice thick with sleep. "Mom, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I'm sorry to wake you. I just wanted to hear your voice." A pause. Then, more alert. "What's really going on?" Kirsten had always been perceptive. It was what made her a good lawyer and a difficult daughter to deceive. "I've been going through some of your father's things. Old papers, journals. It's bringing up memories." "That's good though, right? You've been avoiding that for 3 years. Did your father ever mention anyone named Theodore Ryland or Simon Drexler?" Another pause. "No. Should I know those names?" "Probably not. They were friends from before you were born. I'm just trying to piece together some old stories." "Mom," Kirsten's voice carried the careful tone she used when preparing to deliver difficult truth. "Is this about Dad's drinking? Because you know that was just a rough patch. He got through it." Clyra had forgotten about that year. Travis had been 19, had just washed out of the Ranger Academy after failing the physical tests. He'd come home angry and directionless. Owen had started drinking more than usual, and the two of them had fought constantly. It lasted 6 months before Travis left for Wyoming and Owen got sober again. "No, it's not about that. I'm just filling in some blanks." "Okay." Kirsten didn't sound convinced. "Listen, I've got a deposition this morning, but I can call you later. Are you doing all right out there? You know you're always welcome to visit Seattle." "I know. Thank you, honey. I'm fine. I'll talk to you soon." After disconnecting, Clyra sat with the phone in her hand, thinking about what she hadn't said. That her husband had spent 6 years smuggling people and information across the border. That their family's financial stability had been built on illegal activity. That someone from that past had shown up on her doorstep the same day she'd discovered the truth. She couldn't tell Kirsten or Travis. Not yet. Not until she understood more. They deserved better than half-truths and suspicions. She needed to go back into the tunnel. The other journals would cover the years after 1987, might explain what Owen had been maintaining and why. And she needed to understand the full scope of what he'd hidden before deciding what to do with the information. But first, she'd prepare properly. If Simon Drexler was watching, if others knew about the tunnel, she needed to be ready for complications. She checked Owen's revolver, made sure she had ammunition, gathered her Ranger equipment, first aid kit, rope, emergency beacon, water and food for several days if needed. The cache marked on the map drew her attention again. 30 miles of wilderness, a location Owen had kept secret for decades. If answers existed anywhere, they'd be there. But going meant leaving the homestead unprotected. It meant trusting that whoever had been here yesterday wouldn't return while she was gone. She looked at Simon Drexler's card, still sitting on the table where she'd left it. Whatever you might hear or find out, remember that he did what he thought was right. The words could be comfort or warning. She wasn't sure which. Clyra descended into the tunnel again at mid-morning, better prepared this time. She'd left obvious signs that she was home, truck parked where it was visible, lights on in the cabin, smoke rising from the chimney. If anyone was watching, they'd think she was going about her normal day. The stone steps felt familiar now, less threatening. She counted them as she descended 18 steps to the first chamber. The journals and maps were exactly as she'd left them. She chose the next journal in sequence, dated 1988 to 1992, and settled into the folding chair to read. The entries from this period showed a different Owen. No more active smuggling runs, but constant maintenance of what he called the network. He checked routes, updated maps as Border Patrol patterns changed, maintained contact with what he called safe houses along the dune corridor. He was the network's keeper, its institutional memory, and he was being compensated for it. Monthly payments appeared in the ledger, not as much as the active years, but substantial. $1,000 a month, regular as clockwork. The money was deposited in an account Clyra knew nothing about, then withdrawn as cash and hidden somewhere on the property. She did quick math. From 1,988 to Owen's death in 2021, 33 years at $12,000 per year, nearly $400,000 she'd never known existed. The entries also revealed why he'd continued. It wasn't just leverage. TR had made it clear that walking away completely would mark Owen as a liability. But maintaining the network, keeping the routes viable, made him valuable. Valuable people stayed alive. Threats got eliminated. Owen had chosen to be valuable. But the journal showed increasing unease. References to new management appeared in 1995. TR was stepping back, letting younger people handle operations. Owen didn't trust them the way he'd trusted TR. or at least the way he'd come to an understanding with him. The 3rd of March, 1997. Met the new coordinator today. Calls himself Rook, obviously not his real name. Too young, too aggressive. Doesn't understand that this network was built on trust and discretion. He wants to expand operations. I said no. We argued. He said I don't have veto power anymore. I reminded him where all the records are kept. That shut him up. The network was changing, becoming something different from what Owen had helped build. The entries showed a man trying to maintain control of something that was slipping away from him. Then Clyra found the maps. They were in a separate tube, rolled tight. She spread them on the small table, weighting the corners with stones. These weren't the simple route maps from the first cache. These were detailed topographical surveys with multiple layers of annotation. Primary routes in red, alternative routes in blue. Safe, houses marked with specific symbols, border patrol zones shaded according to surveillance intensity, and locations marked with stars, caches, like the one marked on the map she'd taken upstairs. There were 7 of them, scattered through the wilderness of Montana, Idaho, and southern Alberta, each marked with coordinates and a cryptic identifier, Cache Alpha, Cache Bravo, and so on. The cache 30 miles from her property was marked Cache Delta Primary. The notation beside it read, Complete Archive, Emergency Access Only. Fail-safe activated. Complete Archive. That meant documents, evidence, records of everything. Owen's insurance policy, comprehensive and damning. Fail-safe activated. That was less clear. Some kind of security measure? A dead man's switch? Clyra photographed the maps with her phone, making sure she captured all the details. Then she noticed something else. The tunnel didn't end with this chamber. In the far wall, partially hidden by shelving, was an arcada opening, another passage leading deeper into the mountain. She moved the shelves aside. They were surprisingly light, designed to be relocated easily, and shone her light into the passage. Unlike the entrance tunnel, this one was rough, carved through solid rock. It sloped downward at a steep angle, the ceiling low enough that she'd have to crouch. Owen had built more than a storage room. He'd built an escape route. Clyra followed the passage, moving carefully over the uneven floor. The tunnel wound through the mountain for what she estimated was 200 yards before opening into a larger natural cave. This space was different, not man-made, but adapted. Someone had cleared debris, reinforced the ceiling with timber, and installed a battery-powered lantern on a shelf carved into the stone. And there was another exit. She could feel moving air, see daylight filtering through a narrow opening at the far end of the cave. The exit was concealed by brush on the outside, barely visible even when you knew where to look. But it opened onto the back slope of the ridge, a good half-mile from the homestead and completely hidden from the main property. Owen could enter through the workshop and exit on the far side of the mountain without ever being seen. Or someone else could enter from the hidden exit and access the cache without Clyra ever knowing they'd been there. Like Simon Drexler, the thought crystallized as she examined the hidden exit. Whoever had been maintaining these tunnels after Owen's death, they'd been using this entrance. The dust patterns showed recent disturbance. Boot prints that weren't hers, weren't Owen's old work boots. Fresh scratches on the rock where someone had squeezed through the narrow opening. She'd been assuming she was the first person to discover the tunnel in 3 years. She'd been wrong. Someone had been coming and going regularly, maintaining the cache, monitoring the situation. And yesterday, when she'd made her first descent, they'd been nearby, close enough to follow her into the workshop, close enough to close the hatch partway, a warning or a threat. She still wasn't sure which. Clyra returned to the first chamber and examined it with new suspicion. What else had she missed? She searched systematically, checking behind shelves, running her hands along the walls, looking for anything out of place. In a crevice behind the map tubes, she found it. A small metal box, painted to blend with the stone. Inside was modern equipment, a motion sensor, battery-powered, with a wireless transmitter. Someone had installed surveillance to alert them if the cache was accessed. That's how Simon knew to come yesterday. The moment she'd opened the hatch, descended the stairs, someone had been notified. He'd arrived within hours, which meant he'd been close by, watching, waiting. Clyra disabled the sensor and pocketed it. If someone was monitoring the cache, they'd know it was offline. Let them wonder. Let them worry about what she knew and what she planned to do with the information. She gathered everything she needed, the journals covering 1,988 through Owen's death, copies of the annotated maps, the surveillance equipment. Then she climbed back to the workshop, sealed the hatch, and locked everything carefully behind her. But instead of returning to the cabin, she circled around to the back ridge, following the terrain to where the hidden exit should be. It took her 20 minutes of careful searching, but she found it a narrow gap between boulders, invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. Fresh boot prints marked the entrance. Someone had been here recently, probably yesterday, after visiting the front of the property, checking to make sure the cache was secure, perhaps, or removing something they didn't want her to find. Clyra memorized the location, marked it on her mental map of the property. Then she returned to the cabin, locked the doors, and sat down with the new journals to continue reading. Whatever game she'd stumbled into, she was no longer playing blind. She knew about the escape route, the surveillance, the ongoing interest in Owen's secrets. Now she needed to understand why, after 37 years, those secrets still mattered enough for someone to watch a widow on a remote mountain. The journals from the later years revealed a pattern Clyra hadn't expected. Owen hadn't just maintained the network, he documented everything. Every crossing, every person helped, every payment made. Names, dates, amounts, photographs of the people involved, including those he'd never met, but whose names appeared in communications. Bank account numbers, drop locations, safe house addresses. He'd built a comprehensive record of 3 decades of illegal activity, and everyone involved knew he had it. The entries showed why. In 2003, there was an incident. Someone in the network got arrested in Idaho, a safe house operator caught with false documents. Under interrogation, he'd started talking, giving up names. Within 24 hours, pressure came from somewhere high up to shut down the investigation. The charges were dropped. The man was released and quietly relocated. Owen's entry from that week was chilling. Got the call from TR. The Idaho situation is handled. He reminded me why we keep records. Said the fact that everyone knows everything could be exposed is what keeps everyone honest, mutually assured destruction, like the Cold War. As long as I keep the archive secure and my mouth shut, everyone stays safe, including my family. It's a hell of a way to live. So the records weren't just Owen's insurance, they were everyone's. A guarantee that nobody could be eliminated or exposed without bringing down the entire operation. It was brilliant and terrible, but it also explained why, 3 years after Owen's death, someone was still watching. The records still existed. They still represented a threat to everyone who'd ever been involved. And now Clyra had accessed them. She found the letter in the 2015 journal, tucked into an envelope marked, "For Clyra, Last Resort." Her hands shook as she opened it. The paper was quality stock, the kind Owen used for important correspondence. His handwriting filled both sides of the page. "My dearest Clyra, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've found what I hoped you never would. I've started this letter a dozen times, trying to find words that might make you understand why I kept this from you. The truth is, there aren't any words good enough. In 1981, before we met, I was recruited into something that seemed noble, helping political refugees escape death squads and persecution, moving documents and communications equipment to support asylum seekers. I believed in it. I still do, in a way. But it was also illegal. And once I was in, once I knew names and routes and funding sources, leaving became complicated. By the time I met you, fell in love with you, I was already bound to something I couldn't easily walk away from. I tried. God knows I tried. In 1987, after Kirsten was born, I told them I was done. But the man who organized everything, Theodore Ryland, we all called him T.R. He made it clear that people who left tended to have accidents, unless they were valuable in other ways. So I became valuable. I maintained the network, kept the routes viable, and I documented everything as insurance. As long as those records existed, as long as everyone knew I had them, you and the kids would be safe. I built the tunnel not to hide my past from you, but to hide you from my past. Every day I didn't tell you was a day you couldn't become a target. Every year of silence was another year of protection. The cache at the coordinates marked on the map contains everything. 3 decades of evidence. If anything happens to my family, it goes to the authorities. T.R. knows this. That's why you've been safe all these years. That's why I could never tell you. I'm writing this now because I'm sick. The doctors say cancer, and maybe they're right. But T.R. has been asking pointed questions lately about what happens to the records when I'm gone. He's suggested they should be destroyed. For everyone's protection. I've refused. As long as they exist, you're protected by the same mutual destruction that's kept me alive. But I'm afraid that once I'm gone, someone will decide you're a loose end. Or worse, that you'll find the tunnel and become involved in something that could get you killed. If you found this letter, you found the tunnel. My protection failed. The cache is your leverage now. Don't trust T.R. if he comes. Don't trust anyone who says they're trying to protect you. The only protection you have is making sure everyone knows you'll expose everything if threatened. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I chose for you. I've loved you every day of our 40 years together. That was real. Everything else, the secrets, the fear, the constant vigilance, that was the price I paid to keep you safe. Trust your instincts. You're stronger and smarter than anyone gives you credit for. And remember, the moment you make the archive public, you become worthless to everyone who wants it hidden. Sometimes exposure is the safest option. I love you. I'm sorry. I tried to protect you the only way I knew how. Owen. Clyra read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down her face. The anger was still there at the deception, at the choices made without her consent, at 40 years of lies wrapped in love. But understanding was growing alongside the anger. Owen had been trapped. He'd tried to build a normal life while carrying the weight of dangerous knowledge. Every day of their marriage had been overshadowed by the fear that his past would destroy their future. And he'd carried that burden alone because he believed it would keep her safe. But the letter revealed something else. Owen had suspected his cancer wasn't natural. The timing, T.R.'s, pressure to destroy the records, the suggestion that Owen was becoming a liability. It all pointed to the same conclusion Clyra had reached. Someone had decided Owen Boone needed to die. Slow-acting poison, something that would mimic cancer, that wouldn't raise suspicion. Something that would give them time to search for the records before Owen could make arrangements to protect them. But Owen had been smart. He'd hidden everything so well that even dying, even suspecting murder, he'd managed to keep the records secure. And he'd left her a way to protect herself. The phone rang, making her jump. She checked the caller ID unknown number. She let it ring 4 times before answering. Mrs. Boone. It was Simon Drexler's voice. Calm and professional. I think we need to talk. I know what you found in the tunnel. I know you read Owen's letter. And I know you're scared and angry and don't know who to trust. Then you know I have good reason for all of that. I do. Which is why I'm calling instead of just showing up. I was Owen's friend. More than that, I was his partner in maintaining the network. I'm the one who's been checking the cache, keeping the surveillance active, making sure nobody else found it before you did. Why should I believe you? Because I've had a dozen chances to hurt you and haven't. Because Owen trusted me with his family's safety. And because right now you need someone who understands what you're dealing with. T.R. knows you accessed the tunnel. He knows you have the journals, and he's going to want to talk to you very soon. Clyra's grip tightened on the phone. What does he want? The same thing he's wanted for 37 years. Control. The assurance that his past stays buried. Owen's death was supposed to end this. You finding the tunnel changed everything. Did T.R. kill my husband? A long pause. When Simon spoke again, his voice was heavy with something like regret. Yes, I think he did. I couldn't prove it then, and I can't prove it now, but Owen suspected. The last time we talked, 6 months before he died, he told me he'd figured it out. Said it was too late to do anything about it, but he wanted someone to know. The confirmation hit harder than she'd expected. She'd suspected, but hearing it stated as fact made it real. And you did nothing. By the time Owen told me, the poison was already in his system. We couldn't prove it without an autopsy, and that would have triggered exactly what he was trying to prevent. T.R. would have moved on you and your kids immediately. Owen chose to die quietly to keep you safe. Clyra closed her eyes, grief and fury warring in her chest. What happens now? Now you decide. You can try to hide, but T.R. will find you. You can go to the authorities, but you'll be exposing yourself before you have protection in place. Or you can let me help you do this right. There are people like me who worked with Owen, who've been waiting for a chance to bring T.R. down. We need that cash. With it, we can end this. And what do you get out of it? Freedom. The same freedom Owen wanted. The chance to stop looking over my shoulder, and maybe, if I'm lucky, to honor a promise I made to your husband that I'd protect you if anything happened to him. Clyra thought about the letter, about Owen's final instructions. Trust your instincts. She looked at the surveillance equipment she'd taken from the tunnel, at the journals spread across her table, at the map showing 7 cache locations. I need time to think. You don't have much. T.R. is already moving, but I'll give you 24 hours. After that, I'm coming back whether you're ready or not. Because the clock is running, Mrs. Boone. And when it runs out, people start dying. He disconnected before she could respond. Clyra sat in the gathering darkness, the letter in her lap, and tried to decide who she could trust in a world where her husband had been murdered for knowing too much. Clyra didn't sleep that night. She sat with Owen's revolver on the table beside her, watching the darkness beyond her windows, thinking about trust and betrayal and the impossible choices people made in the name of protection. At first light, she made her decision. She'd go back into the tunnel one more time, gather everything that might be useful, and then decide her next move. Simon Drexler said she had 24 hours. She'd use them. The descent felt routine now, 18 steps to the first chamber, the familiar smell of cold stone and old wood. She'd brought a larger pack this time, planning to take everything she might need. The journals, the maps, any evidence that could be useful. She was organizing materials when she noticed something she'd missed before. One of the shelves had been moved slightly, leaving marks in the dust. She pulled it away from the wall and found another metal box, this one larger than the surveillance equipment. Inside was a journal she hadn't seen before. The cover was different, newer, bound in black leather instead of brown. She opened it and felt her blood turn cold. The handwriting wasn't Owen's. The first entry was dated 11 months ago, 8 months after Owen's death. The 3rd of November 2022. O is gone. Confirmed burial. C, still in residence, appears unaware. Tunnel sealed from her side. Initiating monitoring protocol. Clyra read the words 3 times, trying to process their meaning. Someone had been documenting her, watching her. Treating her like a subject under surveillance, she forced herself to keep reading. Entry after entry detailed her life from an outsider's perspective, her daily routines, the frequency of phone calls from her children, her trips to town for supplies, her walks in the woods, everything observed and recorded with clinical precision. The 15th of December 2022. C. Remains isolated. No unusual visitors. Assessment: unaware of tunnel's existence. Recommend continued passive monitoring. February 8, 2023. C. Avoided workshop for third consecutive month. Emotional barrier remains strong. Probability of discovery low. Cache remains secure. The 20th of May, 2023. Observed C. Doing property maintenance. Concern: workshop floor showing stress around seal. If discovery imminent, may need intervention. The entries continued through the seasons, a complete record of her grief and isolation, documented by someone who'd been watching without her knowledge. Someone who had access to the property, who'd been entering through the hidden exit on the back ridge while she lived her life unaware. Then came the recent entries. The 2nd of September 2024, C. Entered workshop. Observed extended time inside. Probability of discovery elevated. Prepared response protocols. The 3rd of September 2024, tunnel accessed. C. Descended to primary chamber. Retrieved journals and maps. This changes everything. Notifying coordination team. Await instructions on containment. Yesterday, the day she'd found the tunnel. Within hours, someone had documented it and alerted others. That's how Simon had known to come so quickly. But the final entry, dated just hours ago, was what made her hands shake. The 4th of September 2024, 0200 hours. C. Made contact with SD via phone. Conversation monitored. SD maintaining cover, preparing approach. Assessment: C. Is isolated, vulnerable, and in possession of critical information. TR wants confirmation of cache location. Still refusing. O's widow is leverage if needed, but prefer to avoid complications. Recommend immediate retrieval of materials before C reaches primary cache. SD. Simon Drexler. The conversation he'd had with her last night had been monitored. By whom? And what did they mean by leverage if needed? She flipped back through the journal, looking for any indication of who was writing these entries. There were no names, just initials and code designations. But one detail stood out. The writer referenced my access point and maintaining equipment. They were the one who'd installed the surveillance, who'd been using the hidden entrance, which meant this journal belonged to whoever had been maintaining the tunnel. Someone Owen had trusted, or at least someone who'd known about the network, someone who'd continued the surveillance after his death. Clyra's mind raced through possibilities. Simon Drexler had admitted he'd been checking the cache, had been the one maintaining things. But his tone on the phone had been different, concerned, almost protective. This journal read like a tactical assessment. Clinical. Detached. Unless Simon had been lying about everything. She heard it, then the sound that made her freeze. Stone scraping against stone, distant but unmistakable. Someone was coming through the hidden entrance, moving through the escape tunnel toward the main chamber. Clyra grabbed the journal, shoved it into her pack along with the others, and looked for options. The stairs were the only exit she knew well, but if someone was coming from the back entrance, they might have someone stationed at the workshop too. She could be trapped. She extinguished her lantern and pressed herself into the shadows behind the heavy shelving. Her hand found the revolver in her jacket pocket. She'd never shot at another person, had never wanted to. But Owen's words from the letter echoed in her mind. Trust your instincts. Her instincts were screaming danger. Footsteps approached from the escape tunnel. A light appeared, sweeping the chamber. A voice called out, male and unfamiliar, Mrs. Boone. I know you're here. The surveillance shows you entered 20 minutes ago. There's no point hiding. Not Simon Drexler's voice. Someone else. The light found her pack on the floor beside the shelves. The man moved closer, and Clyra could see him now 30s, fit, professional demeanor. He was armed, a pistol holstered at his hip, but not drawn. Mrs. Boone, my name is Kyle Reston. I work with Simon Drexler. We're here to help you. The journal I store, just read, suggests otherwise. Clyra's voice was steady despite her hammering heart. It suggests I'm being assessed as a potential problem. Kyle stopped, his expression shifting to something like respect. You found my field notes. Smart. Most people wouldn't have looked that carefully. Are you the one who's been watching me for a year? Someone had to. After Owen died, we needed to make sure the cache stayed secure. That meant monitoring you to ensure you didn't accidentally stumble onto something that would get you killed. By we, you mean Simon Drexler and Theodore Ryland? Kyle shook his head. TR doesn't know about the detailed surveillance. Simon and I kept that to ourselves. We've been trying to protect you from him. By documenting my every move like I'm some kind of specimen, by making sure that if TR ever asked questions, we could assure him you were no threat. It worked until yesterday. Clyra stepped out from behind the shelves, keeping distance between them. Her hand stayed in her pocket on the revolver. What happens now? Now we get you out of here. TR knows you accessed the tunnel. He's sending people, not to talk, to clean up. You have information that makes you dangerous, and he's old school about handling threats. Simon said, I had 24 hours. Simon was trying to buy time. The truth is, you have about 2 hours before TR's team arrives, maybe less. We need to move now. Clyra studied his face, looking for deception. Why should I trust you? Because I've been in that tunnel a dozen times in the past year, and you're still alive. Because if I wanted you dead, you'd already be dead. And because Simon and I made a promise to Owen that we'd keep you safe, no matter what it cost us. Owen trusted TR once. That didn't work out well for him. Kyle's expression hardened. Owen was right to suspect TR killed him. Slow-acting poison, professionally administered, virtually undetectable. I couldn't prove it then, but I documented everything. It's part of the archive. What archive? The one Owen was building for 20 years, the complete record of everything TR has done. Every operation, every crime, every person he's killed or had killed. Owen wasn't just keeping insurance, he was building a case. And now that you've found it, you're the only person who can finish what he started. The sound of vehicles reached them from above, faint but growing closer. Multiple engines, coming fast. Kyle's expression turned grim. That's TR's team. They're early. We need to go now. The back exit. I'm not going anywhere until I understand what's really happening. What's happening is that you walked into the middle of a 30-year Cold War, and your husband's death just made it hot. TR is coming to make sure Owen's secrets die with his family. And if we don't move right now, you're going to find out exactly how serious he is about that. The engines stopped. Doors slammed. Voices carried through. The morning air. Kyle drew his weapon, but he pointed it toward the stairs, not at Clyra. Your choice, Mrs. Boone. Come with me and maybe survive. Or stay here and definitely don't. Clyra grabbed her pack, made her decision, and followed him into the escape tunnel. Behind them, heavy footsteps descended into the chamber. Someone shouted orders. The hunt had begun. The escape tunnel was tighter than Clyra remembered, forcing them to move in a crouch through rough-hewn stone. Kyle led with his flashlight, moving fast but careful, checking behind them every few seconds. Clyra followed, her pack heavy with journals and maps, her mind racing through everything that had just happened. She'd walked into her husband's workshop looking for closure and found herself running for her life from people Owen had feared for decades. The absurdity of it would have been funny if men with guns weren't hunting her through a mountain tunnel. How many? She asked, keeping her voice low. At least 4, maybe more. T.R. doesn't take chances. Kyle reached the natural cave and helped her through the narrow opening. Can you make the climb? Clyra looked at the ravine exit, a 40-foot drop to a creek bed below, accessible only by rope or by scrambling down a steep rock face. In her ranger days, she'd done harder climbs. But that was 20 years ago. I can make it. Kyle was already securing rope to an anchor point he'd apparently installed previously. Professional preparation. Either he'd expected to need an emergency exit, or he'd been planning this extraction for a while. Listen, he said while working. The cache you found in the tunnel is just a staging area. The real archive, everything Owen collected, is at the location marked on that map. Cache Delta, T.R. Thinks Owen destroyed most of the records before he died. He doesn't know about the primary cache, but you do. Owen told Simon and me where it was, insurance for his insurance. He wanted to make sure that if something happened to him, someone could recover the evidence and use it. Use it for what? Kyle tested the rope, then looked at her directly. To put T.R. in prison where he belongs, to expose 30 years of illegal operations and the people who profited from them. Your husband spent 2 decades documenting everything because he believed someone should answer for the crimes committed. He just didn't live long enough to see it through. Voices echoed from the tunnel behind them. TR's team had found the escape route. They were minutes behind at most. Go, Kyle said, gesturing to the rope. I'll hold them here as long as I can. You'll die. Maybe, but you'll live. That's what Owen wanted. It's what Simon and I promised him. Clyra thought of Owen's letter, his words about making the archive public. Sometimes exposure is the safest option. If she died here, the secrets died with her. But if she reached the cache, if she could get the evidence out, she grabbed the rope and started down. The descent was brutal, her hands burning as she controlled her fall, her boots scrambling for purchase on wet rock. Halfway down, she heard gunfire above sharp cracks echoing through the ravine, Kyle returning fire, buying her seconds. She dropped the last 10 feet, landing hard in the creek, cold water soaking through her boots. The map was in her pack, waterproofed in plastic. She pulled it out, oriented herself by the sun. Cache Delta was 30 miles northeast, in the heart of the Scapegoat Wilderness. 2 days of hard hiking if she pushed, more gunfire above. Then silence. Clyra didn't wait to see who'd won. She moved downstream, using the creek to mask her trail, then cut into thick timber on the north slope. She'd spent 30 years learning this country. If anyone could disappear into it, she could. She moved for 3 hours without stopping, putting distance between herself and the homestead. The terrain was brutal, steep slopes, deadfall, patches of late-season snow. But it was also defensible. Anyone following would have to work for it. At noon, she stopped in a thick stand of spruce to rest and assess. Her phone had no signal this deep in the wilderness. That was both good and bad. They couldn't track her electronically, but she couldn't call for help either. She pulled out the journals and maps, laying them on a flat rock. Kyle had said the primary cache contained everything, but what exactly was everything? She needed to understand what Owen had been protecting before she risked her life to reach it. She found her answer in one of the later journals, dated 2019, 2 years before Owen's death. The entry was marked Archive Contents Final Inventory. Owen had been meticulous. The list ran for pages. Complete financial records of operation funding from 1981 to 2018. Bank account numbers, transaction logs, cash movement documentation, photographic evidence of all key personnel involved in network operations. Over 300 individuals identified by name and role, recorded communications, audio recordings of meetings, phone calls, planning sessions, hundreds of hours of material, government documentation. Classified materials that had been moved through the network, including evidence of illegal surveillance programs, unauthorized military operations, and political manipulation. Testimony preparation. Owen's own sworn statement, ready to be delivered to authorities, detailing his involvement and knowledge of criminal activities, insurance files, documentation of threats made, incidents of violence, and suspected murders connected to network operations, including his own suspected poisoning. The archive wasn't just evidence. It was a complete case, built over 20 years, ready to bring down everyone involved. No wonder TR wanted it destroyed. No wonder Owen had died for protecting it. But one entry caught her attention. Dead man's switch activated January 2020. If I fail, to deactivate monthly archive automatically forwarded to designated recipients. TR knows about this. It's my final guarantee. A dead man's switch. If Owen died or became incapacitated, the archive would be released automatically. That should have protected him. So why had TR risked killing him? She found the answer in the final entries. March 2021, diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Doctor says 6 months, maybe less. TR doesn't know yet. Need to update dead man's switch protocols. April 2021. Told TR about diagnosis. He offered condolences. But I saw something in his eyes. Relief. He thinks my death will be natural, that the switch will be deactivated as a kindness to my family. He doesn't understand that I've already planned for this. Owen had known. Known he was dying, known TR would see it as an opportunity. He'd let TR believe the archive would be destroyed when the cancer took him. But he'd been planning something else. The final entry, dated 1 week before his death, was addressed to her. Clyra, by now you've found the tunnel. Read my letter, maybe even made it to the primary cache. If so, you know everything. The dead man switch is still active, but coded to your biometrics. Now fingerprint and retinal scan at the cache entrance. You're the only one who can deactivate it or activate the release. I've made you the keeper of these secrets. I'm sorry for that burden, but I trust you to decide what's right. The switch will automatically release in 2025, if not deactivated. That gives you time to decide. Keep the secrets and protect our family, or expose the truth and let justice run its course. Choose whatever gives you peace. I love you, Owen. This year, Clyra calculated quickly. If Owen died in May 2021 and set the automatic release for 4 years later, that meant she checked her phone's calendar. The 4th of September 2024. The automatic release was scheduled for May 2025, 8 months from now. TR had 8 months to find the cache and destroy the evidence before it went public automatically. That's why he was moving now, why he'd sent a team to her homestead. Time was running out. But the revelation changed everything for Clyra too. She didn't have to do anything. She could hide, wait out the 8 months, and let Owen's plan execute itself. The truth would come out whether she helped or not, except TR knew about the switch. He'd mentioned it in Owen's journals, which meant he'd spent the last 3 years trying to find the cache, trying to disable the mechanism. And now that Clyra had accessed the tunnel, now that she knew where Cache Delta was located, she'd become the fastest route to finding it. Not a witness to be eliminated, bait to be followed. Clyra looked at the map, at the route marked to Cache Delta. 30 miles through wilderness. If TR's team was tracking her, if they had sophisticated equipment and knew these mountains, she'd lead them straight to exactly what they wanted. She needed a different plan, not reaching the cache, but protecting it, making sure that whatever happened to her, the archive stayed hidden until the automatic release triggered. But that meant staying alive for 8 months, while people with resources and training hunted her. It meant going off-grid completely. It meant her thoughts were interrupted by a sound, distant but distinct. Helicopter rotors. They weren't just following on foot. They were bringing in aerial surveillance. In open wilderness like this, she'd be visible from above. They'd track her movement, vector ground teams to intercept. Unless she did something they wouldn't expect. Clyra pulled out the map again, studying the terrain. Cache Delta was northeast. But there was another cache marked closer, Cache Bravo, only 12 miles west. If the surveillance equipment was standard across all cache locations, if she could reach it and trigger an alert, they'd think she was accessing the archive. They'd commit resources to that location, and she could double back, find a place to hide and wait. Wait for Simon Drexler to make contact, wait for help that might not come, or wait for 8 months to pass and let Owen's final plan execute. It was thin, but it was better than leading them directly to Cache Delta. She repacked quickly, oriented by compass, and started west. The helicopter was closer now, sweeping in a grid pattern. She stayed under tree cover, moving through the thickest forest where aerial observation would be difficult. 2 hours later, she reached a ridge overlooking a narrow valley. According to the map, Cache Bravo should be at the base of the cliff on the far side, a 4-hour hike under normal conditions. Under these conditions, with teams hunting her, the helicopter passed overhead, rotors thundering. She pressed herself against a rock face, staying motionless until it moved on. Then she saw them. 3 figures moving through the valley below, armed and equipped, moving in formation, professional, efficient, closing on her position with tactical precision. They'd anticipated her route. They weren't just following, they were herding her, and she'd walked right into it. Clyra had seconds to make a decision. The 3-person team below was moving to cut off her escape routes. The helicopter was circling back. If she ran, they'd see her. If she stayed, they'd find her. She did what decades of wilderness experience had taught her. She went where they wouldn't expect. Instead of retreating to better cover, she descended toward them, using a steep gully that offered concealment while closing distance. Sometimes the best place to hide was close to the searchers themselves. She moved silently through deadfall and brush, every step calculated. Her ranger training was automatic now, weight distribution, careful foot placement, using natural sounds to mask movement. Below, she could hear radio chatter as the team coordinated. No visual on target. Expanding search pattern north. They thought she was running. Good. Let them think that. She worked her way parallel to their position, hidden by terrain, moving toward a rock outcropping that would give her view of their operation. If she could identify their equipment, their capabilities, she'd know what she was dealing with. From her vantage point, she saw the team clearly. 2 men, 1 woman, professional gear, military-grade communications. But something was wrong with their posture, their movement pattern. They weren't hunting aggressively, they were being cautious, almost defensive. Then she saw why. A 4th person stood near their position, older, authoritative, directing operations. Even from 200 yards away, she recognized the bearing, the way others deferred to him. Theodore Ryland, TR himself. He'd come personally. She watched him consult a tablet, likely showing her projected routes based on terrain analysis. He was speaking to someone on a satellite phone. His body language showed frustration. Then another figure emerged from the tree line. Tall, familiar build, Simon Drexler. He was talking to TR, gesturing toward the high country. An argument, clearly. TR shook his head. Simon gestured more emphatically. Clyra strained to hear, but they were too far away. The helicopter made another pass, drowning out sound. When it moved on, she caught fragments of conversation carried on the wind. Simon, not the way Owen wanted. 40 years protecting this operation, Simon. Difference between protection and murder. TR's response was lost, but his body language was clear. Final. Absolute. Simon stepped back, his expression hard. Then TR did something that changed everything. He pulled a weapon, not a rifle, something smaller. He shot Simon twice in the chest before the other man could react. Simon dropped. T.R. spoke calmly to his team, who moved to Simon's body. No shock, no surprise. This had been planned. Clyra's hand covered her mouth, holding back sound. Simon Drexler, who'd claimed to be Owen's friend, who'd promised to protect her, executed for what? Disagreeing? Questioning orders? TR turned back to the tablet, studying it with the casual attention of a man who'd just solved a minor problem. Then he looked up, scanning the ridgeline. His eyes swept across the terrain, methodical and thorough, and stopped exactly where Clyra was hidden. She froze. Impossible that he could see her at this distance, in this cover, but his gaze held steady, fixed on her position. Then he smiled. A cold, knowing expression. He raised the satellite phone and spoke. Seconds later, the helicopter banked hard, coming straight toward her position. They'd known where she was all along. The searching, the radio chatter, it had been theater. They'd been tracking her electronically somehow. But how? She'd turned off her phone, left everything. The pack. Something in the materials she'd taken from the tunnel. A tracker Owen had planted, or 1T. R's team had added. She'd been carrying their surveillance with her the whole time. The helicopter was 30 seconds out. The ground team was already moving, climbing toward her position. There was nowhere to run that they wouldn't see, nowhere to hide that they couldn't find. Clyra made her choice. She opened her pack, grabbed the journals and maps, and the surveillance equipment she'd taken from the tunnel. She found the tracker, a small disc attached to one of the metal boxes. She removed it, wrapped it around a rock, and threw it as hard as she could toward the valley floor. Then she ran in the opposite direction. The helicopter followed the tracker's trajectory, voices shouting confusion over radio channels. She had seconds of advantage, maybe a minute. She used it to reach a section of the ridge she knew from her ranger days, a narrow chute between cliffs that led to a cave system on the far side. It was dangerous, loose rock and exposure, but it was invisible from above and nearly impossible to navigate without knowing exactly where to find it. She squeezed through the chute, heart hammering, pack scraping on rock. Behind her, she heard someone shout they'd found the false tracker. The helicopter was already banking back. The cave entrance was narrow, hidden behind a boulder. She'd explored it once, years ago, had noted it on her private maps as a potential emergency shelter. She slipped inside just as the helicopter roared overhead. Darkness swallowed her. The cave smelled of minerals and bat guano. She moved deeper, hands on stone walls, feeling her way. The cave was deep, she remembered. Multiple chambers. A chimney exit on the far side if she could find it. Behind her, voices echoed. They'd found the entrance. Lights swept the cave mouth. Clyra moved through absolute darkness, one hand on the cave wall, the other holding her pack. The stone was cold and damp, worn smooth by water over millennia. She counted steps, building a mental map. 20 paces to the first chamber junction, turn left. 30 paces to the narrow passage, she remembered. Duck low. Behind her, lights bounced off walls. Voices carried through the stone passages, distorted by echoes. They were coming, but slowly. Unfamiliar terrain, dangerous footing. She had advantages here. The passage narrowed until she had to turn sideways, pack held in front of her, rock pressed against her chest and back. Tight spaces had never bothered her, but the knowledge that armed men were minutes behind made her breath come faster. Then she was through, into a larger chamber she remembered from her exploration years ago. This space had a water source, a small underground stream that emerged from cracks in the rock. More importantly, it had multiple exits. She could feel air movement from at least 3 directions. She risked using her small flashlight, shielding it with her body. The chamber was, as she remembered, roughly circular, 20 feet across, ceiling lost in darkness above. The stream ran along the southern wall. 3 passages led out. One she'd just come through, 2 others heading deeper into the mountain. She turned off the light and listened. The pursuit had slowed. Someone was stuck in the narrow passage, cursing. T.R.'s voice, calm and commanding, directing them to back out and try a different route. They'd lost direct contact. Good. Clyra moved to the rightmost passage, the one she remembered angling upward. If she was right, it would lead eventually to a chimney exit near the ridgetop. But that was from memory, 15 years old. Cave systems changed. Passages could collapse, fill with debris, become impassable. She had no choice but to try. The passage climbed at a steep angle, forcing her to use hands and feet. The pack made it awkward, throwing off her balance. Once, her foot slipped, and she slid backward 6 feet before catching herself on an outcrop. Her hands were scraped raw, but she kept climbing. The air grew fresher. She could feel wind on her face now, carrying the smell of pine and sun-warmed rock. The exit was real, still accessible. She pushed harder, muscles burning. She emerged into daylight so suddenly she was momentarily blinded. The chimney exit opened onto a narrow ledge on the cliff face, 50 feet above the valley floor. Below, she could see T.R.'s team regrouping near the main cave entrance. The helicopter circled wider, apparently unaware of this secondary exit. But she was exposed here. The moment someone looked up, she'd be spotted. She scrambled along the ledge to where it met the main cliff face, then began climbing. Not down, they'd expect that. Up, toward the ridge top. It was technical climbing without gear, nothing she'd normally attempt. But normal had died when her husband's secrets had crawled out of the darkness. Halfway up, she heard the helicopter change pitch. They'd spotted her. The pilot was maneuvering for position, trying to get close enough for the crew to target her. Clyra pressed against the rock face as rotor wash buffeted her. The helicopter couldn't get too close. The cliff thermals made it dangerous. But they could hover and wait, pin her in place until the ground team arrived. Then she saw it. 10 feet above her position, the cliff face was undercut, creating a shallow overhang. If she could reach it, she'd be invisible from above. Protected from the helicopter, she climbed with everything she had left. Her fingers found holds her eyes couldn't see. Her boots scraped for purchase on tiny ledges. The helicopter roared closer, someone shouting through a speaker, words lost in the noise. She reached the overhang and pulled herself into the shallow space. The helicopter passed directly overhead, so close she could see the pilot's face. But the overhang hid her. They couldn't descend far enough to see beneath it without hitting the cliff. The helicopter circled again, searching. Then T.R.'s voice came, over a loudspeaker, clear and amplified. "Mrs. Boone, this is pointless. We'll find you. We'll find the cache. The only variable is how many people die before that happens. Simon is already dead. Kyle Reston is dead. You'll be dead. And then we'll visit your daughter in Seattle, your son in Wyoming, everyone you've ever cared about. Unless you come down now and tell us what we need to know." It was the oldest tactic. Create fear, offer hope, demand surrender. Clyra had used variations of it herself when talking down frightened hikers from dangerous positions. But T.R. had made a mistake. He'd revealed that Kyle was dead, that Simon was gone. Which meant there was no one left who knew where the cache was located except her. She wasn't just a witness anymore. She was the only path to what they wanted, which meant they needed her alive. Clyra waited until the helicopter moved off, continuing its search pattern. Then she began climbing again. Not down, but sideways, traversing the cliff. Faced toward a section where the ridge curved and forest cover would hide her from aerial view. Her hands were bleeding, her muscles screamed, but she kept moving. Behind her, she heard voices. The ground team had reached the chimney exit, had figured out her route. They were following, climbing where she'd climbed. She reached the forest cover and dropped into thick brush, rolling behind a deadfall. She gave herself 60 seconds to rest, to let her breathing slow, to assess damage. Nothing broken. Cuts and bruises, exhausted but functional. The sound of voices grew closer. She could see them now through the brush, 2 climbers, moving carefully up the cliff face. determined, professional. But she was already moving, working deeper into the forest, using every trick she'd learned in 30 years. She left false trails, doubled back on her path, used water to mask her scent. And as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, she realized something. She couldn't run forever. Eventually, exhaustion or error would end her. But she didn't need forever. She just needed to survive until May 2025, 8 months. Owen's dead man's switch would execute, and everything TR had done, everything he'd killed to protect, would become public knowledge, unless she could find another way. A way to finish what Owen had started without waiting 8 more months. A way to make the truth matter now. The answer was obvious, dangerous, and possibly suicidal. But it was also the only option she had left. She had to reach Cache Delta, access the archive, and somehow, impossibly, transmit it to the world before TR's team killed her. 6 months later, autumn returned to Dead Fern Ridge with the smell of pine smoke and the first dusting of snow on the high peaks. Clyra Boone sat on her porch, watching the familiar ridgeline, a mug of coffee warming her hands. The homestead looked the same as it always had, but everything had changed. The weeks following her escape from TR's team had been the hardest of her life. She'd spent 4 days in the wilderness, evading pursuit, working her way back toward civilization through terrain that had tested every skill she possessed. She'd finally reached a ranger station on the Idaho border, half-starved and exhausted, with a pack full of evidence and a story that seemed impossible. The authorities had been skeptical at first. Then they'd read Owen's journals, examined the documents, cross-referenced the names and dates. Within 48 hours, federal agents had descended on Dead Fern Ridge with warrants and excavation equipment. They'd found Cache Delta exactly where the coordinates indicated. The archive was everything Owen had promised, 3 decades of evidence, meticulously documented and preserved, enough to bring federal charges against 17 people, including Theodore Ryland, TR, had been arrested at his home in Virginia, a respected consultant to intelligence agencies, a man who'd built a second career on the very operations he'd once run illegally. His lawyers were fighting, of course, but the evidence was overwhelming. Audio recordings, financial transactions, photographs, and Owen's testimony, sworn and notarized, waiting all these years to be heard. Simon Drexler had survived after all. TR's bullets had hit his vest, and he'd played dead until the team moved on. He'd reached authorities the same day Clyra did, providing corroborating testimony from his own knowledge of the network. Kyle Reston's body had been recovered near the tunnel, along with 2 members of TR's team who died in the firefight. Kyle had given her enough time to escape. She'd made sure his sacrifice mattered. The trial was scheduled for spring. Clyra would testify, had already given lengthy depositions. Kirsten had flown out immediately when she'd heard, spending 2 weeks at the homestead while Clyra recovered. They'd talked about Owen, about the man he'd been and the choices he'd made. The conversations hadn't erased the hurt, but they'd begun building something new, understanding, perhaps, and a recognition that love and deception could coexist in complicated ways. Travis had come too, quietly appearing one morning with his truck and a week off from the ranch. He'd helped repair the damage to the workshop where TR's team had torn through looking for evidence. They'd worked side by side, not talking much, but the silence had been comfortable. He'd left with an embrace and a promise to visit again at Christmas. The tunnel was sealed now, professionally and permanently. Federal engineers had filled it with concrete after documenting everything. The mountain had reclaimed its secret, but Clyra had kept certain things. Owen's letters, the photographs of him as a young man before the weight of secrets had settled onto his shoulders. His journals, where he'd written about his family entries, where the love and the guilt were so intertwined she could barely tell them apart. She'd created a memory box, placed it on the shelf in the living room beside the photographs of their life together. For herself, For her children, for anyone who might someday want to understand the complete truth of Owen Boone, not just the headlines and the trial, but the man who tried to protect his family in the only way he knew how. Simon Drexler had written to her from witness protection somewhere on the East Coast. His letter had been brief. "Owen would be proud. You chose truth. You chose yourself. You survived. Thank you for giving his sacrifice meaning." She'd written back a longer letter telling him about the trial preparations, about how Owen's evidence was already changing federal policy on intelligence oversight. She'd thanked him for keeping Owen's promise, even though it had nearly cost his life. She didn't know if he'd received it. Witness protection meant uncertainty, meant disappearing into a new identity. But she'd needed to write it anyway. The workshop was different now. She'd cleared out most of Owen's tools, had donated them to a school woodworking program. But she'd kept the workbench, the rocking chair he'd been building. And she'd started her own projects, small things at first, birdhouses and simple shelves, then larger pieces, a new table for the kitchen, a chest for storing quilts. Creating something new from the space that had held so many secrets felt right, like reclaiming the place for herself, for the future, rather than the past. She'd put Owen's photograph on the wall, the one of him holding infant Kirsten, his face open and happy. Beside it, she'd hung a new picture, herself with both her children taken when they'd visited last month. Travis stood tall and quiet, his hand on her shoulder. Kirsten smiled the way she did when she was genuinely happy, not performing. They looked like a family. They were a family, complicated and damaged and healing. Clyra rose from the porch and walked into the workshop. She ran her hand along the workbench Owen had built 40 years ago, feeling the worn wood beneath her palm. She spoke aloud, knowing it was foolish, doing it anyway. "I know you now. The whole truth. All the secrets you kept, all the lies you told, all the reasons behind them." She paused, organizing her thoughts. "I wish you'd trusted me with it. Trusted me to make my own choices, take my own risks. But I understand why you didn't. You thought love meant protection. Maybe it does, sometimes." She picked up a piece of wood she'd been working on, felt its weight and texture. "I forgive you," she said quietly. "Some days more than others. But I'm working toward it, and I'm telling your truth now, the messy, complicated, painful truth, because you were right about one thing. Exposure is safer than secrets. The moment everything became public, I stopped being a target. I became just another witness, valuable only in court." She set the wood back down and looked at his photograph. "Simon asked me to remember you did what you thought was right. I do remember that. But I also remember you made choices for me without asking. So here's what I'm choosing now. I'm choosing to live my life openly. No hidden tunnels, no buried truths. Just the mountain, the work, my children, and whatever time I have left." She turned on the workshop lights, picked up her tools, and began working on a new project. A chair, solid and simple. Something that would last. Outside, the wind moved through the pines with a sound like distant voices. The ridge stood eternal against the darkening sky. Snow was coming, the weathermen said. A hard winter ahead. But Clyra Boone had survived harder things. She'd walked into darkness and found her way back to light. She'd learned that the people you love can be strangers, that truth can be both terrible and liberating, and that sometimes the greatest act of love is simply choosing to keep living. The workshop filled with the smell of sawdust and wood oil. She worked until full darkness fell, until her hands knew the rhythm, and the tools felt like extensions of herself, creating something new from old materials, building a future from the fragments of the past. In May, when Owen's dead man's switch would have activated, she'd plant a garden instead, something living and growing, something that required patience and care and trust in seasons yet to come. But tonight, she'd finish this chair. Solid work, honest work, the kind Owen had taught her to value. And when she was done, She'd sit in it by the fire and think about forgiveness and memory and the complicated truth of 40 years with a man she'd loved without fully knowing. Some people say the past defines us. Maybe it does. But Clyra believed we define the past, choose what it means, how it shapes us, whether it buries us or sets us free. Owen had kept his secrets to protect her. She'd told the truth to honor him. And now, finally, they were both free.